The Seizure of Haiti by the United States, a report on the military occupation of the Republic of Haiti and the history of the treaty forced upon her. This report was signed by 24 leading attorneys, some of whom were state senators, state Supreme Court judges, some of whom were mayors of cities, and they all lent their signature to this report in order to let our government here in the United States know that the actions that they were taking in Haiti was unjustified and it was wrong. This report was sent to members of Congress, and this report came out directly out of Senate hearings. The Congress of the United States wanted to know why is it that their country, the United States, has invaded a neighbor, a much smaller nation, the island nation of Haiti and the Dominican Republic. The U.S. wanted control of Mont Saint Nicolas. They wanted control of Samana Bay, two strategic peninsulas on either end of the island, and they wanted full control of the economy and of the custom houses and of the mineral resources. This report, generated in 1922, very much explains to us what is going on in Haiti today. Why? Because history repeats itself. Things that happen in the past tend to happen again. And this occupation of Haiti, this military occupation of Haiti that is currently going on today, is something that happened in the past, and it happened in very much the same way. This is part 2. Let us read the introductory note again so we can know exactly where this report comes from and how it was generated. Every material statement made in this document is derived from the official report of the hearings before a select committee of the United States Senate, pursuant to Senate Resolution 112, authorizing an inquiry into the occupation and administration of the territories of the Republic of Haiti and the Dominican Republic. These hearings took place from October 4th to November 16th, 1921. The official record of the proceedings has been published by the Government Printing Office. The facts disclosed are not only a part of the history of Haiti, but most of them are established by testimony, by public documents, and official communications and reports passing between the Secretary of the Navy, the Honorable Josephus Daniels, Rear Admiral William B. Caperton, United States Navy, and other officials. It is intended that the facts revealed shall supply their own commentary. It is hoped that a recognition of the truth will lead to the adoption of the logical remedy. This report was generated and circulated in 1922, shortly after the Senate hearings. And so, almost all the members of Congress had access to this report, and they could have taken action to stop what was going on even at that time. But we know that the occupation lasted 19 years, and so we know that Congress did absolutely nothing, even though they were presented with a multitude of facts, with a lot of evidence showing that the occupation was unprovoked and unjustified, and it was a brutal occupation in which many tens of thousands of Haitian civilians and Dominican civilians lost their lives in order to serve U.S. corporate interests, in order so that the owners of the banks and the corporations, the elite that own America and control her for their benefit, to add to their pockets. And the people of Haiti were made to suffer. All the while, this was done, I am sure, against the will of the people of America, because I am sure that if the people were consulted, the people would have said, let us see the evidence before you go into Haiti. And once the people would have seen the evidence, we would have told our government, no, there is no reason for you to send in your military to cause loss of life and to take over control of the resources of our neighbor to the south. A neighbor that helped us during the American Revolution, a neighbor that helped the United States gain her freedom from England. Haiti played a large part in what happened in Savannah, Georgia. There is a monument attesting to that in Georgia today. I am sure that if the people of the United States were given the facts in 1914 and in 1915, the people of the United States would have said, no, there is no reason for our government to invade a much smaller nation and to occupy them militarily, if the facts were presented to the people. But the facts were not presented to the people, because the invasion of Haiti was not for the benefit of the American people. It was not to protect the American people. The invasion was solely to benefit corporate interests, to benefit the elite that control America even today. That's what it has always been about. It's always been about corporate interests. It's about the top 1% in the nation getting their will, having their way. Let us continue by reading some of the highlights of what we read earlier, just so we can flow into the second half, and then we will read the second part of the report in its entirety. From 1804 to 1913, Haiti was a sovereign state under a republican form of government. She won her independence from France in 1804. She was deprived of it in 1915 by the United States. Since then, we have been in virtual control of her territory. Our Marines have been in military occupation of the country, and the former republic has been stripped by us of every vestige of her sovereignty. As a colony, Haiti suffered all the horrors of cruel slavery, with the consequence that a century of independence has not effaced the fear of foreign encroachment and domination. As a measure of protection against them, against alien control, the several constitutions of the Republic have embodied provisions rigidly excluding foreigners from the ownership of land. From an economic standpoint, conditions have been and are exceedingly primitive. From time to time, there has been internal political dissensions resulting in disturbances. It is noteworthy, however, that no American citizen has been injured in person or property by the people of Haiti, nor have any other foreigners been molested, even when internal conflict occurred. Foreign investments have at all times been respected. The interest on Haiti's foreign debt has been scrupulously paid, and her relations with other governments have been free from adverse criticism. She has never manifested hostility to the United States and has given no occasion for our intervention in her affairs. On 6 occasions during 1914 and 1915, the United States made direct overtures to Haiti to secure control of her custom houses and their administration. All of these efforts proved futile. In the meantime, a number of revolutions were in progress in Haiti, similar in character to those that have frequently occurred in Mexico and in various Central American and South American countries, and frequent changes in governmental administration took place. What this report is saying is that in 1914 and in 1915, the U.S. has control of land, Samana Bay, and Molten Nicolas, land in the Dominican Republic and in Haiti, every time the Haitian government said no. In fact, according to this report, the U.S. had been requesting that the Haitian government lease or secede the area, the peninsula known as Mont Saint Nicolas, since 1847. And so in 1914 and in 1915, the United States upped the ante. The United States sent in a much larger naval fleet than the one that they had sent in 1891. The United States made several attempts to gain control of strategic Haitian land and of her finances. And in every instance, the Haitian government said no. Well, what happened, according to this report, revolutions began to occur in Haiti. Revolutions along the line of other revolutions that were occurring in other South American countries. Well, we have had a similar batch of revolutions right there in the Middle East. The Arab Spring, a series of revolutions, that saw the governments toppled and new governments installed. Well, the elders who put this report together, they are saying that we know how our government operates. We know that when they don't like a government, they foment revolutions. They create instability as a pretext for going in to change the government. They use instability to say, now we need to go in to protect the local population. And it is, in fact, the opposite. The United States goes in not to protect the local population, but to take over the government and to take over control of strategic resources. The elders had seen it before, and they are telling our government that the way we are behaving towards other smaller nations is wrong. It is unjustified. Vessels belonging to our Navy frequently entered Haitian waters. In the latter part of 1914, our government offered assistance to the then president of Haiti in view of a threatened revolution upon conditions which were rejected. In October 1914, Mr. Bryan, then Secretary of State, wrote to President Wilson, "It seemed to me of first importance that the naval force in Haitian waters should at once increase, not only for the purpose of protecting foreign interests, but also as evidence of the earnest intention of this government to settle the unsatisfactory state of affairs which exists." And so the Secretary of State wrote to the president and said, you know what? We have to send in more ships. We have to cry louder. Remember, in Isaiah 43 verse 14, it says that the Babylonians cry with their ships. And so the Secretary of State was telling our commander-in-chief that we need to cry louder, that we need to send in more ships in order to let the government of Haiti knows that we mean business, and that if they do not do things the way we want them done, then we will take military action. In accordance with this program, additional vessels were dispatched into the vicinity of Haiti. In November and December of 1914, the State Department communicated various terms, including the control of the custom houses of Haiti, as conditions upon which a newly chosen president would be recognized by our government. Haiti again declined these conditions. And so on December 17, 1914, without preliminary warning, a force of United States Marines was landed at Port-au-Prince from the USS Machias. These Marines proceeded to the vaults of the National Bank of Haiti and forcibly seized and carried away $500,000, which were transported to the Machias to New York. And so on December 17th, 1914, the United States robbed the National Bank of their neighbor to the south, the island nation of Haiti, without any provocation, without Haiti or the people of Haiti owing the United States not $1, without the people of Haiti being behind on any of the payments that they were making to France or to any of the other nations of Europe that had unjustifiably put them into debt. But nevertheless, the United States entered Haitian land, sent in their military on Haitian land, and robbed the bank. Now, whenever you send in your military into a foreign land without permission of the people of the land, that is an invasion. That is a military invasion. And the United States had militarily invaded Haiti without any declaration of war. Congress had not declared war on Haiti, and yet the U.S. military was conducting operations on Haitian soil, robbing the Bank of Haiti. Now, that was the beginning of U.S. soldiers setting foot on Haitian land. As we found out in part 1, this only escalated from there. During March of 1915 and again in May of 1915, the United States made proposals for control of the custom houses of Haiti and Mont Saint Nicolas. And as we learned, these proposals were rejected. And so on July 27th of 1915, the president of Haiti was assassinated amidst revolutions that were springing up all over Haiti. And the following day, on July 28th of 1915, the Marines were landed. The United States asked the fleet of ships that they were using to encircle Haiti, the fleet of ships that they were using to plead with Haiti for control of Haiti's economy. Well, soldiers from those boats that were encircling Haiti landed on Haitian soil, and this began the U.S. military occupation of Haiti. And so, because the president was assassinated, it was very necessary to conduct elections. And on August 12, 1915, Dartignave, a candidate selected for the presidency by the United States, was elected president by the Chamber and the Senate of Haiti, the Chamber of Deputies and the Senate of Haiti, under duress. They were coerced. They were scared into voting and electing Dartignave president by the United States in fulfillment of the wishes of the United States, because Dartignave had promised to give the United States control of Mont Saint Nicolas and control of the custom houses and the entire economy of Haiti. And so on August 17th, 1915, 2 days after Dartignave was elected president, the treaty that was written entirely by the United States government was presented to the president for his signature. The treaty itself, as we learned in part 1, is full of hypocrisy. It is a treaty that was designed so that the United States can have history record that the people of Haiti wanted to be invaded, that the people of Haiti invited the United States in with their military, killing their brothers and sisters in order to free them from some supposed threat that did not exist prior to the United States being denied control of Mont Saint Nicolas, the custom houses, and the economy of Haiti. Remember, the revolutions that sprung up were most likely started by the intelligence agencies of the United States in order to create instability, in order to destabilize the government. And so the treaty that was presented to D'Artagnan, to the Chamber of Deputies, to the Senate, to the government and the people of Haiti was one that was full of hypocrisy and was one that did the direct opposite of what it claimed to be doing. Let us go into the treaty and let us read the first part, and then we'll jump to where we left off in part one. The treaty. This elaborate document begins with a preamble, which in the light of the facts related and those about to be recounted is the height of irony. It declares, the United States and the Republic of Haiti, desiring to confirm and strengthen the amity existing between them by the most cordial cooperation in measures for their common advantage, and the Republic of Haiti, desiring to remedy the present condition of its revenue and finances, to maintain tranquility of the Republic, to carry out plans for the economic development and prosperity of the Republic and its people, and the United States, being in full sympathy with all of these aims and objects, and desiring to contribute in all proper ways to their accomplishment, have appointed for that purpose plenipotentiaries. They're saying that their desire to control the economy of Haiti is something that the Haitians are asking for, as if taking over all of the custom houses and putting all the money that you get from the operations of these custom houses and putting them in your pocket serves the country, as if the country needs to have your military on their land, as if the country needs to be living under martial law. Right here in the preamble, it says that the United States wishes to strengthen the friendship between the United States and Haiti, and that they propose, and that the Haitian people, the Haitian government, asked the United States to take over its economy and to come in militarily to help prevent disorder. Well, again, this is hypocrisy. No nation will want another nation to come in and take over its economy, to come in and take over all of the monies that it is collecting. The people of the country would prefer to spend the money themselves. They do not want that money to go to another nation. But that is what the United States claimed that Haiti wanted. That Haiti wanted the United States to come in, take over control financially, pocket most of the money that the country is making, put the people under martial law, under military occupation, and then say that it is what the people wanted. Well, today, because of this report, we know that that was not the will of the people. We know that this treaty was coerced, and we know that the Haitian people signed this treaty at gunpoint. The obligations assumed by the United States are contained in the provision. The government of the United States will, by its good offices, aid the Haitian government in the proper and efficient development of its agricultural, mineral, and commercial resources, and in the establishment of the finances of Haiti on a firm and solid basis. Well, here we come to the gold rush. The United States was interested in controlling the agricultural, mineral, and commercial resources of the nation. Here clearly is the intention of the United States. Here clearly is what the ships, the battleships, were negotiating. This is what the battleships were pleading for. They were pleading for control of Haitian land, of her agricultural, mineral, and commercial resources. Let's remember, let's take a step back. Remember that it was the gold and the mineral resources of Haiti that built Spain, that permitted Spain to be at one time the richest and most powerful nation in the world, the one having the largest empire in the world. It was the agricultural resources of Haiti that built France, that permitted France to become the most powerful nation in the world at that time, to allow Napoleon to think that he could create the first world government, a new world order at that time, one government under Napoleon in France. It was the commercial resources of Haiti that England was after when England sent 55,000 into Haiti to wrestle Haiti out of the hands of Napoleon and France. And so, here clearly in this provision is the intention of the United States, their purpose in sending all of those battleships to encircle their tiny neighbor to the south. The intention of those battleships was to plead for control of Haitian land, the Haitian economy, and thereby for total control of the agricultural, mineral, and commercial resources of Haiti. The gold rush was on in 1915 when the United States went into Haiti, because the United States know full well what Britain knew, what France knew, what Spain knew, and that is the land of Haiti is the richest land perhaps in the entire world. It was the mineral resources of Haiti, the gold, and the other precious metals of Haiti that built Spain, that made Spain the richest nation in the world at one time, that gave Spain the largest land empire in the world at one time. It was the mineral resources of Haiti that built Spain. And then it was the agricultural resources of Haiti that built France. It was the sugar, the tobacco, the chocolate, the cotton. It was all of these things that the soil of Haiti produced. The soil of Haiti is perhaps the most fertile soil in the entire world. That's why at one point, Haiti, little Haiti, was supplying 40 to 60% of Europe's needs in a number of agricultural products, including sugar and coffee. And so, the agricultural resources of Haiti and the mineral resources of Haiti were vast, and the United States knew that then, and they know that today. Also, it was for control of the commercial resources of Haiti. Haiti has unlimited riches. Even today, there is more copper in Haiti than perhaps in any other nation in the Americas. Perhaps anywhere from 100 to 200 billion dollars worth of copper. And there is a lot of gold in Haiti. There is a lot of oil in Haiti. Some speculate there is more oil under Haiti than there is in all of Venezuela. And that is because what's going on under the Caribbean Sea is the same geology that is going on in the Middle East. Under the Middle East, you have three tectonic plates that are shifting, rubbing. This creates a lot of pressure, and a lot of the mineral wealth that is deep under the Earth's crust bubbles up. The same thing is happening under the Caribbean Sea. At Haiti, you have the convergence of three large plates, and the rubbing of these plates create a lot of friction, and a lot of the minerals that are deep under the earth bubble up. And so Haiti is continually being replenished. It is an almost unlimited source of mineral wealth, and the United States knows this. And so the gold rush that was on for the United States in 1915 is on today, because the United States had long considered Haiti to be its reserves, its oil reserves, its mineral reserves. And today, the United States have decided to go in there and to mine Haiti for all of its vast wealth. And it has invited the United Nations, Canada, France. It has invited all the elite of the world. It has invited a lot of wealthy people to this carving up of Haiti, to this party that it is hosting on Haitian soil. As we read in an article that was presented in Haiti Liberty, this article details the fact that even within the State Department, it is recognized today that there is a gold rush in Haiti right now for her land, for her mineral resources, for everything, all the wealth that is within Haiti today. As we will read in an article that was written in Haiti Liberté, the gold rush is on. The United States has invited most of the world's elite to this party that they are hosting in Haiti. This party whereby they are separating the land and the resources among themselves. They have casted lots for Haiti, and they are now sharing it out. Let us look at the article. The title of the article is WikiLeaked Cables Reveal After Quake, a Gold Rush for Haiti Contracts by Ansel Hertz and Kim Ives. Disaster capitalists were flocking to Haiti in a gold rush for contracts to rebuild the country after the January 12, 2010 earthquake, wrote the current U.S. Ambassador Kenneth Merton in a secret February 1, 2010 cable obtained by WikiLeaks and reviewed by Haiti Liberté. The gold rush is on, Merton headlined in a section of his 6 p.m. Situation Report, or SITREP, back to Washington. As Haiti digs out from the earthquake, different U.S. companies are moving in to sell their concepts, products, and services, he wrote. President Preval met with General Wesley Clark Saturday, January 30th, and received a sales presentation on a hurricane earthquake resistant foam core house designed for low-income residents. And so, immediately after the earthquake, companies were coming from all over the place, out of the woodworks, coming and asking for their contract, asking for their piece of Haitian land, asking for their right to take away Haitian resources for pennies. And remember, $13 billion was collected by the international community for earthquake relief. Most of that money went right back into the hands of foreigners. One man who had the ear of President Preval, perhaps more than anyone else, was Louis Luck, Washington's Unified Relief and Response Coordinator, heading up the entire U.S. earthquake relief effort in Haiti. Let's see what Mr. Lux says later on. Ambassador Mertens announced gold rush began as Haitians were still being pulled from the rubble. Again, Ambassador Mertens announced gold rush began as Haitians were still being pulled from the rubble. Remember, while Haitians were still being pulled from the rubble, the U.S. military prevented many boats from many different nations carrying aid from entering into the ports of Haiti. Many airplanes carrying aid was returned to their country, not permitted to land at Haitian airports. All the while, the United States was allowing military hardware, military equipment, and soldiers to enter Haitian land. This was the first steps towards total control of all the airports and all the ports under pretext of assistance, under pretext of providing stability. All the while, the intention was to secure Haiti, to prevent its citizens from rising up against the invaders, against the multinational corporations, against all of these nations from other countries that are now in Haiti, ravaging the people from within. The U.S. sent in their military to make sure that the foreign interest is protected, not for the protection of the people. All the aid that was coming in was sent back. Ambassador Mertens' announced gold rush began as Haitians were still being pulled from the rubble. Since then, U.S. aid has doled out nearly $200 million in relief and reconstruction contracts. By this April, just 2.5% of the money had gone to Haitian firms, according to the Center for Economic and Policy Research, and that ratio is maintained to this day. Only a small percentage goes to Haitian firms. That means that maybe 12.5 billion of the 13 billion collected never went to the people of Haiti. All went to the ONGs and to the international firms that are doing business in Haiti. None of it went to the people. It was simply a means of control. The United States said, we cannot trust to give you the $13 billion because you are a corrupt nation. You have a corrupt government. Your people are nothing but thugs. At least that's what they presented to the world. And they said, we need to step in to control the 13 billion so that we can make sure that it do what it is supposed to do for the people. But that never happened. The 13 billion went right back into the hands of foreigners. Luck, for one, justifies making money off disasters. It's kind of the American way, he told Haiti Liberté. Just because you're trying to do business doesn't mean you're trying to be rapacious. There's nothing insidious about that. It wasn't worse than Iraq. Again, he said, it's kind of the American way. I ask you, is it the American way? Is it the American way to treat your neighbor the way the United States treated their neighbor in 1915? Is it the American way today in 2015 to use the disaster as an excuse to go in and to steal the riches of the land, leaving nothing for the people who are suffering, the people who the land belongs to? Is it the American way? I like to think that most Americans do not see it that way. I like to think that the actions of the American government does not always reflect the will of the American people. And I don't think it reflected the will of the American people in 1915. And I certainly hope it does not reflect that what's going on in Haiti does not reflect the will of the American people today. On August 19th, 1915, Admiral Caperton was notified that the State Department desired him to assume charge of the 10 principal custom houses in Haiti, to collect the custom dues, to use the funds for the organization of a constabulary and temporary public works, and to support the new Haitian government. The funds were to be deposited in separate accounts in the name of Admiral Caperton, the United States government holding these funds, and they put in quotations, in trust for the people of Haiti. Admiral Caperton carried out these instructions, and between August 21 and September 2nd, 1915, seized the custom houses at the 10 principal ports. For several months, naval officers collected all custom dues and made all disbursements. This deprived the Haitian government of all income whatsoever, since the custom houses were particularly the sole sources of national revenue. In response to the order of August 19, 1915, Admiral Caperton sent a long message to the Navy Department. Read it in part as follows. Following message is secret and confidential. United States has now actually accomplished a military intervention in affairs of another nation. Hostility exists now in Haiti and has existed for a number of years against such action. Serious hostile contacts have only been avoided by prompt and rapid military action, which has given United States control before resistance has had time to organize. We now hold capital of country and 2 other important seaports. The seizure of the custom houses arose the strongest opposition on the parts of the people and the Haitian government. In a series of notes addressed to the American charge d'affaires, protested vigorously against the violation of its sovereignty. No explanation or apology was ever offered by the government of the United States. Objections to the treaty by the Haitian chambers. In the meantime, the Haitian government was considering the draft of the treaty submitted to it on August 17, 1915. The president was favorable to the treaty. Remember, the president was D'Artagnan. He was selected by the United States because he offered to give up all the things that the United States wanted. The president was favorable to the treaty, but opposition to it was growing in the cabinet and the chambers due to, and I quote, fear of sentiment throughout the country against the American customs control, propagated constantly by the last few years by the faction leaders, end of quote. The president and the cabinet thereupon threatened to resign for this same reason. Admiral Caperton recommended to the Navy Department that in the event of the resignation of the new Haitian government, a military government should be established with an American officer as military governor, adding significantly, present is most critical time in relations with Haiti, and our decision now will, to a great extent, determine future course. If military government is established, we would be bound not to abandon Haitian situation until affairs of country are set at right and predominant interests of United States of America secured. End quote. The proclamation of martial law by Admiral Caperton. By the early part of September 1915, the augmented forces under the command of Admiral Caperton were in complete control of all the principal towns and routes in Haiti, had seized all the sources of national revenue, had the custody of all the national funds, and were engaged in expending them directly, without turning over any portion of them to the Haitian government. Public order and the public purse were altogether in the mastery of the Navy Department. On September 3, 1915, Admiral Caperton declared martial law in the city of Port-au-Prince by proclamation, in which he announced, in order to afford the inhabitants of Port-au-Prince and other territory hereinafter described the privileges of the government, exercising all the functions necessary for the establishment and maintenance of the fundamental rights of man, I hereby, under my authority as commanding officer of the forces of the United States of America in Haiti and Haitian waters, proclaim that martial law exists in the city of Port-au-Prince and the immediate territory now occupied by the forces under my command. I further proclaim, in accordance with the law of nations and the usages, customs, and functions of my own and other governments, that I am vested with the power and responsibility of government in all its functions and branches throughout the territory above described, and the proper administration of such government by martial law will be provided for in regulations to be issued from time to time as required by the commanding officer of the forces of the United States of America in Haiti and Haitian waters. The martial law herein proclaimed, and the things in that respect so ordered, will not be deemed or taken to interfere with the proceedings of the constitutional government and Congress of Haiti, or with the administration of justice in the courts of law existing therein, which do not affect the military operations or the authorities of the government of the United States of America. Okay. On September 8, 1915, Admiral Caperton sent to the commanding officer of the battleship Connecticut in northern Haitian waters the following message. Successful negotiation of treaty is predominant part present mission. After encountering many difficulties, treaty situation at present looks more favorable than usual. This has been effected by exercising military pressure at propitious moments in negotiations. And so when it was beneficial, they applied military pressure in order to negotiate. They put a gun to Haiti's head and said, let us negotiate. Yesterday, two members of cabinet who have blocked negotiations heretofore resigned. I wonder how that happened. President himself believed to be anxious to conclude treaty. At present, am holding up offensive operations and allowing President time to complete cabinet and try again. Am therefore not yet ready to begin offensive operations at Cape Haitian, but will hold them in abeyance as additional pressure. So you see, the United States is purposefully applying pressure, knowing all too well what they want from the pressure that they are applying. Naval officers were constantly urging the members of the Haitian government to accept the treaty, pointing out the necessity of its acceptance without modification. The treaty was finally signed by the Haitian government on September 16, 1915, and although not ratified by the United States until May of 1916, a modus vivendi providing for the immediate application of the treaty followed. The withholding of funds necessary for current expenses of Haitian government. Under the Haitian Constitution, the treaty to be binding had to be ratified by the Senate and the Chamber. To facilitate its prompt ratification, the Haitian government asked for an immediate assurance that the United States would procure a temporary loan to the Haitian government, and represented that it had no funds at its disposal even to pay salaries and current expenses. That's because the United States took over all of the custom houses. That's because the United States robbed the Haitian bank and took all the money that the government had put on behalf of the people into the bank back to New York. The Haitian government was robbed at gunpoint by a much larger nation, its neighbor to the north, the United States. No such assurance was received. So after taking the money that belonged to the people, the United States even refused to lend the Haitian government money in order to pay for schools, salaries, roads, medicine, and all the things that the people of a nation need in order to survive on a day-to-day basis. Again, we read, no such assurance was received, but exercising further pressure upon the government, Admiral Caperton, under instructions from Washington, seized a consignment of unsigned banknotes intended for the Haitian government, notifying the Navy Department that the notes to so seized would be signed by the National Bank and turned over to the Haitian government immediately after ratification of the convention. And so the United States stole some more Haitian money and said, you know what? We will give it to you after you ratify this agreement that we are forcing you to take, that we are negotiating with you under gunpoint. This was done in spite of the fact that the issue of these notes had previously been authorized by the Haitian government. The admiral and the charge d'affaires separately requested the authorities in Washington to permit the former to turn over to the Haitian government funds sufficient for current expenses and for the payment of back salaries. The admiral informed President d'Artagnan that funds would be immediately available upon ratification of the treaty. The president seemed utterly discouraged by this action and humbly pointed out that the delay in the ratifying of the treaty was not due to any lack of effort by himself or his cabinet, that the withholding of funds only furnished another weapon to those opposed to the treaty, and that if the United States government persisted in withholding all funds, ratification would become so difficult that he and his cabinet would resign, rather than attempt the fight in the Senate under this handicap. Finally, on October 3rd, 1915, Secretary Daniels authorized Admiral Caperton to arrange for the payment to the Haitian government of a weekly amount necessary to meet its current expenses, with further statement: question payment back salary will be settled by department immediately after ratification of treaty. And so the back salary was still being withheld. The Navy Department was being delayed. The Navy Department inquired several times of Admiral Caperton why ratification of the treaty was being delayed, and received the reply that since the Admiral had continually received assurances that a majority of the Senate favored the treaty, he had refrained from taking any steps which might appear as using force to secure ratification. On October 6, 1915, the Chamber of Deputies ratified the treaty. It was still necessary to obtain the ratification of the Haitian Senate. In the meantime, the funds collected at the several custom houses were being applied by the naval collectors to defray the expenses of the constabulary, of public works, and the like. No payment of interest charges on the Haitian public debt was made. Remember, Haiti was never late on her payments in public debt. But when the United States took over, those payments were not being made. No payment of the interest charges on the Haitian public debt was made, although the receipts of the customs services had previously been lawfully pledged by prior Haitian governments. In fact, the treaty provisions for the use of the custom funds for this purpose immediately after paying the expenses of the receivership were never complied with by the American Receiver General until 1920, notwithstanding the fact that sufficient funds were realized from the customs to meet the demands of other categories of expenses which, according to the treaty, were subordinate to the Foreign Loan Service. And so, all of the European governments that had forced Haiti to take on debt unjustifiably with usurious rates, those debts were made to be paid first. They were designed so that the Haitian government would pay all the foreign debts before they can do anything for the people of the country. On November 3rd, 1915, Admiral Caperton, referring to the treaty and its criticisms, pointed out to President D'Artagnan that the only objections are unimportant technical points and abstract principles. These and other details can be arranged later. The final act of coercion. On November 5th, 1915, the Senate committee made a report on the treaty, accepting some of its provisions and suggesting modification of others. A few days later, the Hector, one of the American naval vessels in Haitian waters, at the instance of Admiral Caperton, made a special trip to bring one Francois, who will be elected to fill vacancy from Cape Haitian to Port-au-Prince in order to secure his vote for the ratification of the treaty. Because in the language of the Admiral, absolutely essential all possible votes for ratification be secured. And so this gentleman was given a naval escort. On November 10th, 1915, the Secretary of the Navy gave the Admiral the following explicit and unprecedented instructions as to what he was to say and do. Arrange with President D'Artagnan that he call a cabinet meeting before the session of Senate, which will pass upon ratification of treaty, and request that you be permitted to appear before that meeting to make a statement to the President and to members of the Cabinet. On your own authority, state the following before these officers. I have the honor to inform the President of Haiti and the members of his cabinet that I am personally gratified that public sentiment continues favorable to the treaty, that there is a strong demand from all classes for immediate ratification, and that treaty will be ratified Thursday. I am sure that you gentlemen will understand my sentiment in this matter, and I am confident if the treaty fails of ratification that my government has the intention to retain control in Haiti until the desired end is accomplished, and that it will forthwith proceed to the complete pacification of Haiti so as to ensure internal tranquility necessary to such development of country and its industry as will afford relief to the starving populace now unemployed. Do you hear the threat? Meanwhile, the present government will be supported in the effort to secure stable conditions and lasting peace in Haiti, whereas those offering opposition can only expect such treatment as their conduct merits. The United States government is particularly anxious for immediate ratification of by the present Senate of this treaty, which was drawn up with the full intention of employing as many Haitians as possible to aid in giving effort to its provisions, so that suffering may be relieved at the earliest possible date. Rumors of bribery to defeat the treaty are rife, but are not believed. However, should they prove true, those who accept or give bribery will be vigorously prosecuted. It is expected that you will be able to make this sufficiently clear to remove all oppositions and to secure immediate ratification. Acknowledge Daniels. And so, the admiral was instructed to tell the cabinet that if they do not respond favorably to what the United States is demanding, then all of Haiti will be pacified. That means that the country will have to be destroyed if that is what it takes in order for the United States to gain control of all the custom houses, of all the land that they want, and complete and total control of her economy, her finances, and Haiti's mineral resources. The gold, the oil, the vetiver, and all the precious resources that are in Haiti even to this day. The admiral complied with this command. In view of the express and covert threats thus conveyed, on the following day, November 11th, 1915, the treaty was ratified by the Senate. A treaty that was coerced, a treaty that was signed at gunpoint. From the beginning of August 1915 until long after the so-called ratification of the treaty, the situation in Haiti can best be described in the words of Admiral Caperton. The status of our administration in Haiti was at this time purely one of military control, completely against the wishes of the people. During this period, offensive military operations were conducted by our forces against Haitian revolutionaries. What revolutionaries? Haitians defending their country. Haitians who wanted to live in peace and in harmony with their brothers and with their sisters without foreign intervention, without foreign soldiers. People who were not born on the land, people who do not belong on the land, who are on the land with guns, threatening them, menacing them, killing them at every opportunity. The status of our administration in Haiti was at this time purely one of military control. During this period, offensive military operations were conducted by our forces against Haitian revolutionaries, which resulted in considerable loss of life to the Haitians, under circumstances that will not be discussed, probably too gruesome to be discussed. Haiti under the treaty. Although war has never been declared by us against Haiti, and there has been no possible cause for war against her or her people during the greater part of the 6 years following the ratification of the treaty, martial law has been maintained in Haiti by our Marines, and martial law is enforced there today. This was written in 1922, 7 years after the United States invaded Haiti, 7 years into the United States military occupation of Haiti. Martial law still existed. The people of the land of their fathers, their land that they had freed through blood and paid for in gold to France, the people in that land were not permitted to come and to go as they please. Their movements were restricted. Their ability to work and to make a living was restricted. Their right to happiness was removed by the United States. The people of Haiti from that moment on were no longer free to pursue happiness the way Americans are free to pursue happiness in this country today. At least that's what we are led to believe. But we know even that is basically not correct. You are not free to pursue happiness because we are all a slave in this system, in this capitalist system that was designed for us to remain slaves. Work labor, the labor force. Haiti under the treaty. Although war has never been declared by us against Haiti, and there has been no possible cause for war against her or her people during the greater part of the 6 years following the ratification of the treaty, martial law has been maintained in Haiti by our Marines, and martial law is enforced there today. Repeated trials and sentences by our provost courts and military commissions have taken place there. And so the United States even set up kangaroo courts in order to prosecute the Haitian people for wanting freedom, for wanting their independence, for wanting to be sovereign again, for wanting the right to move freely in the country that they were born in the country that is the country of their fathers, their native land, a land which they took back from Europe through blood, through a bloody revolution that lasted 13 years, a land that they won back from France, a land that France then forced them to pay for in gold. Haiti had to pay for her independence in gold after paying for it in blood. And so, on this very land that the people of Haiti fought so hard for, the United States was now limiting them with martial law and prosecuting them in mass for wanting their freedom. The Haitian chambers were dissolved in 1917 for the second time since the invasion, and no elections had taken place in nearly 5 years. Not a few Haitians welcomed the original offer of our friendly aid in July 1915 as a means of escape from the chaos of the moment. First disillusioned by our seizure of their national revenues and funds, and then by the successive coercive steps taken by the United States, they were long ago thoroughly disappointed not only by the lack of any constructive policy instituted in their behalf, but by the suppressive measures which completely violated the spirit of our professed intentions. Knowing that the treaty was imposed by duress, and that it has not been adhered to by the United States, the people of Haiti are now demanding its abrogation, the abolition of all of control by martial law, and the restoration of their national institutions suppressed during the years of the occupation. Under a subsequent protocol for a loan, the receivership of customs and the financial control are to be retained during the life of the loan. Haiti is thus under the present status, tied hand and foot to the United States under a treaty forced upon her by military occupation, by coercion and duress, by fear of the consequences of martial law, and by the forcible seizure, the placing under embargo, and the withholding of all her national funds and pecuniary resources. The treaty was signed with a gun to the head of the people of Haiti. Commentary upon this said chapter in American history, we could have read commentary upon this sad chapter in American history is superfluous. A stain has attached to our national honor, which, unless speedily expunged, will become an indelible blot. For this great nation to play the part of a bully. In this day and age, we talk a lot about bullying. There's a lot of anti-bully laws. But the biggest bully on this block appears to be us, the United States. Let's start over. Commentary upon this said chapter in American history is superfluous. A stain has been attached to our national honor, which, unless speedily expunged, will become an indelible blot. For this great nation to play the part of a bully toward another, weak in material resources and physically powerless to maintain its sovereign rights against incalculable odds, is nothing short of political immorality. The command of self restraint leads one to refrain from drawing parallels, and a desire to avoid all sordid considerations does not permit a reference to the economic injury that our country would inevitably sustain were it to delay further the undoing of this stupendous wrong. And so the elders were telling our government what we are doing to a smaller, weaker, proud neighbor is wrong. What we did to Haiti in 1915 is wrong. What we are doing to Haiti today is wrong. It is the same thing happening all over again. It is history repeating itself. There is nothing new under the sun. The present government of Haiti. In the spring of 1917, the Senate and the Chamber of Deputies were in session, engaged in considering the draft of a new constitution for the country, submitted by American officials. Much opposition existed to several provisions of the proposed constitution, chiefly to one which would allow foreigners to acquire and own land. Again, the constitutions of Haiti always limit foreign ownership of land. What do we see today in 2015? We see the biggest land rush in the world is going on right now in Haiti. As we speak, Haiti is being carved up by the nations of Europe. The nations of Europe and the elite are casting lots for Haiti, and all the elite of all the nations in the world have been invited to the party. The gold rush, as the State Department said and wrote in their memos, is on. Again, we read, much opposition existed to several provisions of the proposed constitution, chiefly to one which would allow foreigners to acquire and own land. The president and cabinet favored the draft. A deadlock was imminent. Thereupon the president dissolved the chambers. Since then, there have been no elections to and no sessions of the chambers, which in consequence are now defunct. Such semblance of government as remains in the hands of the native Haitians is exercised by the president, a cabinet, and a council of state, whose members hold office solely during the pleasure of the president, who we remember was handpicked by the United States. It is common knowledge in Haiti that the present government owes its continuance in power solely to the support and presence of our Marines. The term of President D'Artagnan will expire in May 15, 1922. Under the Haitian Constitution, the president is chosen by the Senate and Chambers in joint meeting. The senators and deputies are chosen by direct popular vote in January of an even-numbered year, indicated by presidential decree. No call for an election in January of 1922 was issued, and there can therefore be no session of the chambers in April to elect a president for the new term commencing May 15. There will thus exist either a vacancy or, without constitutional authority, the present incumbent or a nominal successor will be appointed by the Council of State. In any event, after May 15, 1922, the government will be even less representative than it has been since the treaty. It is not unreasonable to assume that Washington could, without difficulty, induce the Haitian government to proceed to the election of Chambers and of a successor to President D'Artagnan at an early date. It is only with such a new Haitian government that any negotiations for a realignment of Haitian American relations or for an adjustment of Haitian finances can fairly be carried on. To negotiate with the government of President D'Artagnan would be in keeping with the methods employed in 1915 to force acceptance of the treaty. The continuance of this state of affairs is intolerable to those proud of American traditions and moved by the spirit of liberty and justice. And today, here in America, we need to be moved by the spirit of liberty and justice to say no. What is going on in Haiti today is a repeat, a deja vu of what happened to Haiti by the United States in 1915. And this bullying must end. This idea that might is right must end. A bigger nation cannot simply be allowed to go into a smaller nation and do as they wish. That is not justice. And we, as proud Americans, should say no. We should tell our government that that is not right, that we do not want to be represented in that way, and that your actions do not represent our will and our choices. It is not something that we accept. You do not represent us. We need to tell the government that, and we need to say it with one voice, and that voice needs to be loud and it needs to be strong. Conclusions. From the foregoing summary of the salient facts as to our intervention in Haiti and descriptive of the present status of the Haitian government, we deduce these general and specific conclusions. 1. The presence of our military forces in Haiti after the disturbances of July 27, 28, 1915 had quieted down was violative of well-recognized American principles. 2. The seizure and withholding by our forces in 1915 of Haitian national funds was a violation of international law and of the repeated professions by responsible American government officials of our position and attitude toward Latin American republics and weaker governments. 3. The imposition and enforcement of martial law without a declaration of war by our Congress and the conduct of offensive operations in Haiti by Admiral Capitan prior to the acceptance of the treaty by Haiti were equally clear violations of international law and our own Constitution. 4. The methods employed by the United States in Haiti to force acceptance and ratification of the treaty framed by the United States, namely the direct use of military, financial, and political pressure, violate every canon of fair and equal dealing between independent sovereign nations and of American professions of international good faith. 5. The maintenance in Haiti of any United States military force or of the control exercised by treaty officials under cover of the Treaty of September 1915 amounts to a conscious and international participation in the wrong of the original aggression and coercion. 6. The present native government of Haiti, chosen in 1915 unsupported by any elected representative since 1917, being now at the end of its term of office, no negotiations should take place with such government which involve the future of Haiti or which can in any material respect affect its future. 7. The functions of a Department of Colonies and Dependencies assumed by the Navy Department and conferred on it by mere executive action are unauthorized by Congress or by other sanction of law and should be condemned as essentially illegal and as a usurpation of power. 8. We declare without qualification that the honor and good name of the United States, the preservation of the sovereignty and the cherished liberty of Haiti, and her rights to fair dealing on the part of the United States, as well as the possibility of assuring continuance in the future of honorable and amicable relations between our country and Latin America based on trust and confidence, all require A. The immediate abrogation by the United States of the Treaty of 1915, unconditionally and without qualification. B. The holding of elections of representatives to the legislative bodies of Haiti and of a president by the free will of the people at an early day. C. The negotiation of a new treaty with a new Haitian administration for friendly cooperation between the United States and Haiti upon such terms as shall be mutually satisfactory to both countries and by the methods that obtain between free and independent sovereign states. And so, the elders in this report that was based on the hearings. This report came out of the hearings, out of the testimonies that went before Congress in 1921. This report is telling the United States that you had no business going into Haiti in the first place and that you were bullying a smaller neighbor in your section of the world. And so this report, signed by 24 elders of the United States of America, is telling our government here in the United States that bullying is wrong, that attacking a neighbor, a smaller nation, for the purpose of taking over their riches, their wealth, is wrong. Killing them to take their land and to rob their bank is wrong, and that we need to stop. Well, if those elders were alive today, they will be horrified to learn that the United States is once again engaged in the same activity that it engaged in 100 years ago. And this time, the United States brought all of Europe with it. It's not just the United States. It's France. It's Canada. It's England. It's Spain. It's Germany. It's all the elite of Europe. And it's all the elite everywhere in the world who have been invited to the carving up of Haiti, to the dissecting of Haiti. They all are in Haiti today, and they have casted lots for her, and they are separating her, sharing Haiti out among themselves, among the nations of Europe, among the elite of the entire world. Today, Haiti is under military occupation, and pieces of her are being sold off to the highest bidder right in our faces while you and I are sitting down. This is the behavior of the United States towards her neighbor. And this has to end.